I was standing in the middle of my brother's rehearsal dinner when my dad tapped his glass and the whole room went quiet. He smiled, that big warm smile he always saved for moments he wanted people to remember. And then he said it, clear, loud, into a microphone. You know, we always joked that we wished we'd stopped at one. Turns out, we were right. This one. And he pointed at my brother across the table. This one was the one worth keeping. The laughter that followed was nervous, uncomfortable. My aunt's fork froze halfway to her mouth. I watched a cousin glance at me, then quickly look away. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up. I picked up my water glass and I drank from it slowly, the way you do when you need your hands to have something to do. My chest was burning, but my face was still. I was 31 years old. I'd spent the last 8 years quietly keeping my parents financially afloat, and they had just told a room full of 60 people that I was the mistake they should have corrected. 3 months later, the truth came out, and the fallout was something none of us saw coming. Least of all them. Let me start from the beginning because none of this makes sense without it. Growing up in Phoenix, I was what people politely call the responsible one. My brother Callum was 2 years younger and light years ahead in our parents' eyes. He was funny, loud, always walking into rooms like he already owned them. My parents ate it up. Dad coached his little league team. Mom framed his drawings and hung them in the living room. When Callum won a regional speech competition in 7th grade, they threw him a party. When I got a full academic scholarship to Arizona State, Mom said, "That's nice, honey. Your dad's taking Callum to look at a used car this weekend. Can you help me pick something out for his room?" I used to tell myself it was just a phase, that they'd come around. That once I proved myself, really proved myself, they'd see me the same way they saw him. I got a degree in accounting. Then I got my CPA license. Then I landed a job at a mid-sized financial firm in Scottsdale, managing accounts for small businesses. Real work. Good money. The kind of career that, if Callum had built it, would have had my dad framing his business cards. But I wasn't Callum, so it didn't count. What did count, at least to my parents, was Callum's restaurant. He'd always wanted to open one. A gastropub downtown, the kind with reclaimed wood walls and cocktails named after old westerns. My parents were all in. Mom designed the logo herself. Dad told everyone at church about it. The problem was, Callum had no idea how to run a business. He had charm and a great palate, and zero sense of what a P&L statement was. Within 18 months of opening, he was drowning. That's when my parents came to me. Not to ask, to tell. "He just needs a little help getting through the slow months," my dad said on the phone one Sunday. "You're in finance. You know how this works. You can spare a little." A little. That's how it started. I transferred $1,800 the first month to cover a payroll shortfall, then 20,200 the next, because a supplier threatened to cut him off. I renegotiated his linen contract over the phone on my lunch break, saving him about $400 a month. I rebuilt his entire bookkeeping system on a weekend in October, flying to Phoenix and sleeping on my parents' pull-out couch while Callum took his girlfriend to Sedona. Did he thank me? He sent a thumbs-up emoji. My parents called to say the restaurant was doing so much better and that Callum had a really great instinct for hospitality. I kept a spreadsheet. I know, of course I did. Over 2.5 years, I transferred a total of $47,000 to Callum's restaurant accounts. I logged every transaction. Not because I plan to use it, just because I'm an accountant and that's how my brain works. I track things. I was tracking the slow, steady draining of my savings account, while my parents told everyone that Callum was a self-made entrepreneur. I want to be honest about why I kept doing it. It wasn't just duty. Though I told myself that, part of me still believed that one day they'd see it, that there would be some moment at a dinner table, or a holiday, or a phone call where my dad would say, "We couldn't have done any of this without you." I kept waiting for that moment. I kept paying for it like a ticket to a show that never started. The rehearsal dinner was at a steakhouse in Scottsdale. Callum was marrying a woman named Britt who was fine, Genuinely fine, not the way people say fine and they mean the opposite. She was just a person. The restaurant was full of her family and ours, round tables with candles. The kind of event where everyone's performing a little. I'd flown in from Denver, where I'd moved 18 months earlier for a senior analyst position. I'd bought a new dress. I'd arranged my own transportation from the hotel because when I'd asked if someone could pick me up, my mom said Callum had a lot going on. So I Ubered. And I sat at a table near the back with some cousins I barely knew, and I ate my salmon and I smiled when I was supposed to smile. Then my dad stood up. He went on for maybe 4 minutes. He talked about Callum's journey, the restaurant, how proud they were, how Britt was the perfect woman for their son. It was warm and specific and clearly rehearsed. And then, right at the end, he said the thing about stopping at one. About Callum being the one worth keeping. A few people laughed because they assumed it was a joke. One of Britt's uncles chuckled loudly and then went quiet when no one matched him. Callum looked at me across the table. I cannot tell you what his expression was. I've turned it over in my mind 100 times and I still don't know if it was apologetic or triumphant or just blank. My mom was looking at her hands. I finished my water. I excused myself to the restroom. I stood at the sink for 3 minutes and breathed. Then I went back out, said goodnight to Britt and her parents, and left. In the Uber back to my hotel, I didn't cry. I pulled up my banking app and I looked at the transfer history. $47,000. 2.5 years. Every month, without fail, while I was eating grocery store sushi for dinner and skipping the dentist because I kept telling myself I'd take care of myself next month. I made a decision that night that wasn't emotional. It was mathematical. I had subsidized a business that my parents used as proof that their favorite child was a success. I had done it while being publicly written off as the lesser product of their marriage. The return on investment was negative in every measurable way. I was done. When I got back to my hotel room, I typed a text to my dad. Not long. Just, I heard what you said tonight. I won't be transferring any more money to Callum's account. I also won't be doing any further financial consulting for the restaurant. I wish Callum and Britt well. I sent it. I turned my phone face down. I slept better than I had in months. By morning, I had 11 missed calls. 3 from my dad. 4 from my mom. 2 from Callum. 1 from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Britt's mother, who had apparently been looped in immediately. I listened to my dad's voicemails while I had breakfast alone at the hotel. The first one was confused. The second one was irritated. The third one was the one that used the word selfish, which I thought was a bold choice given the circumstances. My mom's text ranged from guilt to grief in about 40 minutes. There was a lot of family takes care of each other, and this isn't the time, and you're going to ruin Callum's wedding week. I noticed there was nothing like, I'm sorry your dad said what he said. Not one word acknowledging what had actually happened. I flew home to Denver Sunday afternoon. I did not attend the wedding brunch. I sent a card and a gift from Callum and Britt's registry, a stand mixer they'd wanted. Because whatever my feelings were, I wasn't going to make their actual wedding the battleground. But I did not go. And when my mom texted to ask where I was, I said only that I'd decided not to make the trip. Callum's restaurant ran into serious trouble about 6 weeks after the wedding. Without my monthly transfers, 2 payroll cycles came up short. A supplier they'd been on thin ice with. I'd been managing that relationship, negotiating their payment schedule for over a year. Cut them off when a check bounced. The restaurant ran a brunch service that required a specific linen vendor, and that contract lapsed because no one had tracked the renewal date. I had always tracked the renewal date. Then the health department showed up. I want to be careful here because I had nothing to do with that visit. I did not call anyone. I did not report anything. What I knew, because I had been inside their books for 2.5 years, was that Callum's walk-in refrigerator had been flagged in a prior inspection and the repairs had been logged as completed when they hadn't fully been. I'd flagged this to Callum in a text 14 months earlier. He had replied with, "Yeah, I'll handle it." He hadn't handled it. The help department issued a citation and a temporary suspension of food service. It lasted 11 days. In the restaurant business, 11 days is not a small thing. I found out about all of this through a cousin who still texted me occasionally. She wasn't close to Callum, she just kept an eye on things and sometimes sent me updates the way you do when you genuinely like someone and want them to know they're not invisible. She also told me what Callum had posted on his restaurant's social media. It was a story about outside interference and people who want to see you fail. He didn't name me. He didn't have to. Our family is not that large. A few people asked in the comments. A few people asked in the comments. A few people assumed. My aunt on my dad's side, my dad's older sister, who had always been the one person in that family who said what she actually thought, called me on a Wednesday evening. "I want to hear your side," she said, which is maybe the most generous thing anyone said to me that entire year. I told her. All of it. The transfers, the timeline, the bookkeeping, the supplier negotiations, the refrigerator flag. I did not exaggerate. I had the spreadsheet. I read her the numbers. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Honey, your father knows what you did. He's always known. That's what makes it worse." I didn't respond to that. I didn't have to. What happened next, I had no hand in orchestrating. My aunt, on her own, brought it up at a family gathering I hadn't attended. My cousin's 4th of July barbecue. She didn't air the spreadsheet. She didn't make a scene. She simply said, when the conversation turned to Callum's restaurant struggles and someone suggested it was bad luck, that actually the restaurant had had significant behind-the-scenes financial support for years, and that support was gone now, and maybe people should think about that. The question of where that support had come from apparently took about 15 minutes to work its way around the yard. My dad called me that evening. His tone was different. Not apologetic, not exactly, but careful. He said he thought we should talk. I said I agreed, but that I wasn't ready to talk on the phone, and I'd let him know when I was. He waited for me to say more. I didn't. Callum called twice that week. I let both go to voicemail. The first message was defensive. The second was shorter. Just him saying he didn't think things had to be this way. I thought about that a lot. Things didn't have to be this way. He was right. They didn't have to be this way. He was right. They didn't have to be. They had been made this way, specifically and repeatedly over years. But I didn't call back. The person who showed up for me during all of this was my work friend Sasha, who knew the broad outlines but not the details, and who one afternoon in the break room listened to me explain the whole thing with the calm attention of someone who genuinely wanted to understand. She didn't tell me I should reach out. She didn't suggest I write a letter or attend family therapy or give it time. She said, "You didn't stop helping them because you don't care. You stopped because you do care about yourself, and that is not a flaw." I've thought about those words more than almost anything else that's happened in the last 2 years. My own life through all of this kept moving. I got the senior analyst promotion I'd been working toward. 6 months after the rehearsal dinner, my director pulled me into her office and told me the firm was launching a new division focused on hospitality industry clients, restaurants, hotels, event spaces, and she wanted me to lead the team. I almost laughed out loud at the irony. I said yes. I started running again, something I dropped when I was too tired and too financially stressed to care about anything outside of work and transfers. I signed up for a half marathon in the fall. I got a membership at a climbing gym and started going Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I was sleeping. I was present. I was spending my weekends doing things I actually wanted to do instead of flying back to Phoenix to fix someone else's problems. There was someone too, a man named Joel who I'd met at a friend's dinner party. He worked in urban planning, which meant he spent a lot of time thinking about systems and infrastructure, and what makes things hold together or fall apart. We talked for 3 hours at that party about nothing and everything, and he texted me the next day. On our 4th date, he asked me why I seemed like someone who had recently put down something very heavy. I told him a version of the story. Not everything, but enough. He listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. When I finished, he said, "Do you feel better, or do you feel worse, now that you're out of it?" I thought about it honestly. "Better," I said. "Much better. But also like I'm still learning how to use my hands now that I'm not carrying it anymore." He understood that. He's the kind of person who understands things without needing them spelled out. My parents' calls came less frequently as the months went on. The tone shifted from pressure to something more subdued. I'd been told through the cousin grapevine that Callum was exploring selling part of the restaurant, that they brought in an outside consultant, an actual paid one, to assess the books, and that the numbers were not encouraging. My dad had apparently mentioned to my aunt that he thought they might have relied too heavily on informal support in the early years. I thought that was a remarkable way to describe what had happened, but I also noticed it was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I was likely to get from him in the near term. My mom texted me on my birthday. It was a short message, just, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Miss you." I stared at it for a while. Then I responded with "thank you." 2 words. Because I wasn't there yet, but I also wasn't going to pretend she didn't exist. There is no tidy ending to this. I want to be honest about that, because I've heard plenty of stories that wrap up in a bow, and that's not what real life does. My family is not fixed. I do not know if I will ever have an easy relationship with my parents. Callum and I have not spoken. I do not know if the restaurant survives. What I know is this. My apartment in Denver is quiet in the mornings. I make coffee and I sit by the window and I watch the neighborhood wake up, and I feel, most days, like a person who is living her own life. That sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. I spent years living someone else's choices, funding someone else's dream, waiting for someone else to decide I was worth something. I stopped waiting. And when I stopped, something in me that had been braced for years finally let go. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just telling you what happened and what it cost me and what it gave back. If any of this sounds familiar, if you've ever sat at a table full of people who should have had your back and felt completely alone, then you already know what I mean. You don't have to earn your place in your own story. What would you have done? Tell me in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this has reached. I keep coming back to the moment my dad tapped that glass. Not because it still hurts the same way. It doesn't. Not anymore. But because it was the moment everything became undeniable. For years I'd been explaining away the smaller things. The forgotten scholarship. The party they threw for Callum and not for me. The way my ideas became brilliant once he repeated them. I told myself those were just oversights. That family was complicated. That I was being too sensitive. But a microphone in a room of 60 people doesn't leave room for interpretation. What I've learned, slowly and not without some real grief, is that the consequences we experience in life are rarely random. They follow from choices consistently made over time. My parents chose, again and again, to take what I offered and redirect the credit. Callum chose to accept that arrangement without question. And I chose for far too long to keep funding a version of our family that had no place for me in it. All of those choices had weight. All of them eventually landed. When I finally stopped transferring money, stopped negotiating with suppliers on my lunch break, stopped flying home to fix books, while Callum was in Sedona, the restaurant didn't collapse because I did something to it. It collapsed because the thing holding it up was gone. That's not revenge, that's just physics. There's something I think about when I look at how the last 2 years have unfolded. The people who come out of painful situations with their dignity intact. And I'm not saying I've done it perfectly, I haven't tend to share a few things. They don't abandon their integrity even when they'd have every right to. I could have posted the spreadsheet publicly. I could have called Callum's investors directly. I didn't, not because I was above it, but because I knew that becoming the kind of person who operates that way wasn't something I could undo. Keeping your ethics when you're angry, when you've been genuinely wronged, is harder than it sounds. It costs you something in the short term, but it's the thing you get to keep. They also tend to be clear-eyed, not cynical. Clear. I had to stop telling myself a story about my family that wasn't true. That was harder than cutting the money. Money is just numbers. Letting go of the version of my parents I've been hoping for my whole life. That was the real work. I had to look at the evidence, the actual record of choices they'd made over decades, and decide to believe it instead of explaining it away. That kind of honest reckoning with reality is what changes things. Without it, I'd have gone back. And then there's the staying power. The part where you don't collapse when they push back. When my dad's voicemails shifted from confused to accusatory. When Callum implied on social media that someone had wanted to see him fail. When my mom's texts arrived on my birthday like nothing had happened. You have to be able to hold the line through all of it, not because you're hard, but because you know why you drew it. Sasha said it simply. Standing in a break room with a bad overhead light, you stopped because you care about yourself, and that is not a flaw. I've been writing that sentence somewhere in the back of my mind ever since. You don't have to earn the right to your own life, and the people who've made you feel like you do. They were wrong about that from the beginning.